The courthouse woke early like a busy station. Doors clicked, voices layered, and the smell of coffee floated from a small cart near the entrance. People held folders, envelopes, and fear that showed in tight cheeks and fast steps. Officers at the security table moved in a practiced rhythm, guiding belts and keys into gray trays and waving people through the metal frame. The whole building felt like a machine built for rules, time, and lines. Daniel Hayes stepped in with a steady walk and a quiet face. His navy suit was simple, his tie calm, his shoes clean. He carried a plain paper ticket that read, in block letters, Defendant check-in. He had accepted it without a word at the front desk, because he wanted to see how the morning moved for ordinary people. He did not explain himself. He did not correct the label. He just watched and listened with patient attention. 2 officers managed the table. One checked IDs and reminded people to empty pockets. The other watched the screen as bags slid through the scanner. When the first officer saw Daniel's ticket, a small smile flickered, the kind that comes from a quick assumption. The second officer glanced too and shared a few light words. It was not harsh, yet it landed like a weight, because a label can feel heavy even when it is spoken lightly. Daniel stepped through the detector, then held the door so a young mother could lift a stroller. She whispered thanks. A man in a work jacket hurried by with loud steps. A volunteer in a bright vest directed people to benches and forms. The building breathed people in and out, every minute adding new stories to the line. Daniel kept his place in the flow and moved toward courtroom 2B. The hallway to 2B was full but gentle. People sat on wooden benches, reading letters, or staring at floor tiles. A clerk walked past with a stack of files held like a careful cake. The courtroom door stood open. Phones off, hats off, the bailiff said in a friendly way that still left no room for debate. Daniel took a seat in the back row. He liked the back because it gave him a full picture of the room without pulling attention. Tall windows poured in pale light. Dust floated like soft snow. The judge's bench faced the room under the seal. Microphones waited with tiny red eyes. A ceiling fan turned a quiet circle. The air held fear and hope at the same time. Daniel folded his ticket, unfolded it, then laid it flat on his knee. He did not hide it. He did not display it. He let it exist without argument. The clerk began to call names. People stood, spoke, and sat again, voices small but brave. One person asked for more time to pay a fine. Another explained a missed date with trembling fingers. A teenager answered with yes, sir, and no, ma'am. The judge had not yet come in, but the work had already begun. An officer leaned against the door frame and scanned faces with casual patience. A public defender with kind eyes slipped into the empty seat beside Daniel and asked if he needed help. Daniel thanked him and said he was fine, he was here to listen and learn. The public defender nodded, the kind of nod that accepts a mystery without pressing for more. He moved on to another person and spoke with a gentle voice, showing a map of next steps. Daniel noticed how a calm tone could slow a fast heartbeat. The judge entered, and everyone stood. Robes moved like a curtain, and the room settled. The morning docket went forward in steady steps. Each case was small in paper size and large in human size. The clerk misread a name and then corrected it kindly. A microphone squeaked. The officer at the door chuckled with another officer about something private and short. The clerk called a name close to Daniel's, but not quite his. She looked around, puzzled when no one moved. She called again, adjusting a vowel. Daniel thought of raising his hand but stayed quiet. He was not here to center himself. He was here to see how people are welcomed or pushed by simple words. The bailiff whispered to the clerk, and the list went on. During a break, the hallway filled like a slow river. The officers relaxed, talking about a rumor that a federal visitor might be in the building. One said he did not see anyone who fit the picture. He nodded toward the crowd, and both shared a quick laugh. It was a small laugh, yet in a place like this even small laughs can scrape on someone's nerves. Daniel stepped aside to let an older man pass with a cane. A volunteer asked Daniel if he needed directions. Daniel thanked her and asked where self-help forms were kept. She led him to a table with neat stacks and a sign that said, "We're here to help." Daniel read a form about changing a court date. He asked how people learn about these forms. The volunteer sighed and said many do not know, or they are too tense to ask. He returned to the courtroom and took his back row seat. He pulled out a small notebook and wrote short lines. He wrote about labels, about tone, and about how a quiet joke could still pinch. He wrote about the young mother with the stroller and how one held door can make a morning easier. He described the volunteers' table and the fact that fear often makes people miss friendly letters printed in bold. The clerk called the near name once more and looked at Daniel. Daniel rose and approached the rail with slow steps. He asked the judge, in a soft voice, for a chance to speak later, after the morning list. The judge looked at the clock, at the papers, and then at Daniel's eyes. The judge nodded. "We can make time," the judge said. Daniel thanked the court and returned to his seat. A few whispers followed him. The room resumed its rhythm, but something had shifted, like a curtain lifting to let in more light. Daniel continued to write. He noted how a missing slip could turn a calm face tight. He marked how people talked faster when they felt lost. He wrote, "A name is a person, not just a sound." His letters were neat and clear. He did not judge. He observed, because observation, done with care, is a kind of respect. The morning ended with quiet relief and quiet worry sharing the same bench. Some people left lighter, others felt heavy as they walked out. The officers made space for the flow. The volunteer handed out 2 more sets of forms and smiled in a way that made shy people braver. The public defender searched the hall for a client who had slipped away, then sent a quick text and waited with patient eyes. Daniel stood at a window and watched a bus hiss to a stop and open its doors. A cyclist checked a chain. Clouds traveled slowly, thin and high. Everything outside seemed ordinary, yet each small thing slid into the story of the day. Daniel pressed the paper ticket between his fingers. The raised letters felt like tiny hills. He was not angry at them. He simply felt the weight and what it meant to carry them. When the judge returned, the light from the tall windows had warmed to soft gold. Dust flecks turned to tiny lanterns. The bailiff called the room to order. People took their seats. The clerk adjusted the microphone, and it gave a brief squeak and then behaved. The officers at the door stood a little straighter. Daniel took one more steady breath. He stepped forward, ready to speak after a morning spent listening. The hallway felt softer after the short break, like a guitar string that had been loosened a little, but the tension was still there, hiding in the corners. Daniel walked back toward courtroom 2B with the same steady pace he had kept all morning. He carried nothing but the small notebook and the plain paper ticket that still said Defendant check-in. He did not hide it, and he did not explain it. He wanted to see the full path a person walked when the world put that word in their hands. At the doorway, the 2 officers were back at their posts. One waved people through with a friendly hand and short reminders about phones, hats, and bags. The other officer checked the flow and kept an eye on the hall. They spoke in low voices between groups, a kind of work rhythm that made the long day feel shorter. When a visitor dropped a bundle of forms, one officer bent fast to help, then made a light joke to soften the moment. It was not cruel at all. Still, Daniel saw how humor in a serious place could land in different ways depending on who received it. Inside the courtroom, a new crowd had formed along the benches. Some faces were new, some had returned after making calls or finding a document. The volunteer in the bright vest moved from person to person with a kind smile and quick, clear answers. The public defender Daniel had met earlier stood near the rail and spoke to a nervous teenager about a plan, step by step, like a coach before a match. The teen's shoulders lowered a little with each sentence. Daniel took his place in the back row again. The tall windows let in more light now, the sun had climbed. Dust sparkled, slow and calm, in the air above the tables. The seal above the judge's bench seemed to glow with a warm tone. A clock ticked in a steady, honest way, and it reminded everyone that time moved forward no matter what. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge returned. Everyone stood and sat again in a careful wave. The clerk adjusted the microphone and reviewed the stack of files, each one a thin slice of a person's life. A man with a strong accent stepped to the podium and tried to explain a date change. He searched for words, and the clerk helped by repeating a phrase slowly and pointing to a calendar. The judge listened with patience and set a new date with clear, short instructions. Daniel wrote 3 words, "Patience makes space." A phone chirped in the second row. It chirped only twice, short and sharp, before the owner silenced it with a red face and a quick apology. The bailiff gave a simple reminder, not angry, not heavy, just a firm guideline. There was a ripple of soft laughter from a corner of the room, the kind that people do when the tension loosens for a second. The owner of the phone smiled, then stared at the floor. Daniel wrote, "Small stumbles feel huge in rooms like this." The clerk called a long name and stumbled over 3 letters. A woman rose and corrected it gently, showing with her voice how it should sound. The clerk thanked her and repeated it the right way. Daniel watched the woman's face soften at hearing her true name spoken out loud. He wrote, "A name is a person, not a guess." During a pause, a staffer glanced across rows and made a small motion for Daniel to move. "Defendant seating is over here," the staffer whispered, pointing to a taped sign on a front bench that said "Case Participants." The word defendant had been scratched out, and the new words were printed on a strip of paper under it. Daniel nodded and moved without resistance. The bench creaked as he sat. A young father already on the bench clutched a folder and gave Daniel a quick, nervous smile. Daniel smiled back in a calm way that said, "You're not alone." On the other side of the rail, a deputy returned with a file that did not match the name just called. The clerk checked, frowned, and asked for a moment. Files were traded, flipped, and sorted again. It took 60 seconds. It felt like 6 minutes to the person at the podium. Daniel wrote that down too. Small delays feel heavier when your whole day depends on one paper. The 2 officers from the doorway stepped inside for a moment and stood along the wall. They whispered that a special federal observer might come later, according to a morning rumor. One officer scanned the room as if expecting a person with a crowd around them or a suit with a flag pin and a line of staff. Nothing like that seemed to be here. They relaxed and slipped back to their posts. The public defender passed Daniel again and paused. "You okay? Do you need me?" he asked softly. Daniel gave the same answer as before. "I'm okay. I'm listening. Thank you for asking." The public defender nodded and moved on. He spoke to a young woman seated 2 spots away from Daniel who had missed an earlier date because of a bus breakdown. He told her how to show the bus company notice and ask for a reset. His voice was kind, but also practical. He did not make false promises. The young woman's hands shook a little less. At a second break, Daniel stepped out to the hall and followed the smell of coffee to a small kiosk. He asked for a plain coffee, no sugar, and took it to a high table near a window. Outside, the day had turned bright. A bus rolled by. A city worker sprayed water along a line of flowers, and the water arced in a glittering curve. The simple normal scene felt like a gift in the middle of a building full of worry. He opened his notebook and read what he had written. He added more lines, short and clear. He wrote about the volunteers table and the value of a printed map that shows where to stand, when to speak, and who to ask. He wrote about the sign that still showed the word defendant under the taped label, and how a fresh, single sign clean and kind would carry a better message. He wrote about tone, the quiet power of tone, and how a low, Calm voice can slow the rush in another person's chest. A call buzzed in his pocket. It showed a familiar number. He answered and spoke in a low voice that was easy to miss under the hallway noise. He listened for a short time, asked 2 brief questions, and said he would call back in the afternoon. He did not use any title. He did not give any instruction beyond that. When the call ended, he looked at the small, flat envelope in his jacket just for a second and then closed the jacket again. He wanted to stay with the room, and not with paperwork, for as long as he could. Back in 2B, a new cluster of people had filled the benches. The bailiff had a gentle but clear motion for hats, for gum, for phones, for bags. He made the same motion many times without making it feel sharp. The clerk continued through the list. A man explained he had lost a letter. The judge asked simple questions and offered a second copy. A woman described child care gaps. The clerk gave her a printout of local help. Each small step was practical, and each practical step took a little fear out of the air. The officers at the door looked in again, just as 2 plainclothes visitors crossed the hall and stood outside for a moment. They carried nothing obvious. They did not try to be seen. They simply looked in, nodded to each other, and kept walking. The officers traded a curious glance, then shook their heads. No VIP parade, no special seats, so the rumor was probably nothing. They returned to their rhythm. A man with paint on his sleeves stepped to the podium and tried to explain a missed time. He spoke fast, like a person used to working with hands rather than papers. The judge slowed him with a small lift of the palm and asked for one clear sentence. The man breathed, tried again, and said it simply. The judge decided fairly and gave steps for making it right. Daniel wrote, "Slow the story so truth can fit." The clerk glanced toward Daniel again. She seemed to notice the old label on his ticket and the taped label on his bench. She called the near name once more, searching for where it should land. Daniel rose and took 2 steps toward the rail. "Your Honor," he said in a gentle voice, "I asked earlier if I might speak at a time that does not delay others. I am ready whenever the court is ready." The judge looked at the clock and at the docket, then at the room. "We will finish these next 2 matters," the judge said, "and then we will hear from you." The judge's tone was respectful, open, and curious. A small wave of whispers moved through the benches. The officers at the door shared another look that said, "Who is he?" Daniel returned to the bench and sat. The young father next to him gripped his folder with less force and whispered, "Good luck." Daniel smiled in a way that said thank you without making a scene. He watched the next case with the same careful attention he had shown all day. The volunteer in the bright vest slipped in and left a short stack of flyers on a side table. "First-time visitor? Here's what to know." The font was large and friendly. The flyer explained the order of events and where to stand when your name is called. Daniel's eyes warmed at the sight. He wrote, "One kind sheet can rescue many mornings." As the last of the 2 matters finished, the judge took a sip of water and looked toward Daniel. The room had a new stillness. The clock ticked. The air felt expectant but not sharp. It felt like the quiet before a teacher begins a lesson that might change how a class sees the world. The officers stood a little straighter. The clerk readied a blank note to record what would be said. The public defender leaned a shoulder against the rail and waited with open eyes, as if hoping the next moments would make his work tomorrow a little easier. Daniel placed the notebook in his pocket and smoothed the folded ticket between his fingers. He stood up with calm posture and a soft breath. He did not look important. He looked like any person who had chosen his words with care. He took 1 step, then another. The path from the bench to the rail was short in feet, but long in meaning, because it carried the weight of everything he had heard, seen, and felt since the doors opened that morning. He reached the rail and rested his hands lightly on the wood. His voice, when it came, was low and clear, the kind of voice that asks people to lean in instead of step back. The room waited. Daniel's eyes took in the whole space: the judge, the clerk, the bailiff, the officers, the people on the benches, the volunteer by the door, the public defender, the man with paint on his sleeves, the young father with the folder, and the woman who had taught the room to say her name right. He carried all of them in his next breath. He did not begin with a title. He did not begin with a demand. He began with the simplest truth he had learned long ago, that listening first makes speech kinder. He looked at the judge with respect and said he had spent the morning watching small moments that felt big to the people living them. He said he would share what he saw in a way that helped, not hurt. And as the first sentence rose in his throat, the officers at the door leaned in without even knowing they had done it, drawn by a feeling they could not yet name. The room was so quiet that even the clock felt loud. Daniel stood at the rail with a calm face and a steady breath. He looked at the judge first, then at the clerk, the bailiff, the two officers near the door, and the rows of people who had brought their worries to this place. He waited one slow beat, not to show power, but to show care. When he spoke, his voice was low and warm, the kind of voice that carried without pushing. "Your Honor," he said, "thank you for allowing me a few minutes." He glanced at the clerk and added, "With the court's permission, I would like to hand a letter to the clerk and place my identification on the record." The judge nodded. "You may." Daniel reached inside his jacket and took out a slim leather case and a sealed envelope. He walked to the clerk's desk in smooth steps, opened the case, and showed a badge and an ID card. The clerk read the name, looked up at Daniel, and then looked again at the card, as if to make sure she had seen it right the first time. Her eyes widened just a little, not with fear, not with shock, but with the weight of new understanding. She passed the envelope to the judge and the ID to the bailiff, who checked it with careful hands. The judge broke the seal and read the short letter. It was simple and respectful. When the judge finished, he looked at Daniel and then at the room. "For the record," the judge said, "the court has reviewed a letter and identification from Mr. Daniel Hayes. He is the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He is present today in an observational capacity." A soft wave moved across the benches, not a stir of noise, but a change in the air. The public defender's eyebrows lifted. The volunteer pressed a hand to her vest. The two officers at the door stood a little straighter without being told. None of them spoke. They did not need to. The meaning had reached them. Two plainclothes security professionals, who had kept to the background all morning, stepped into the doorway and stood with a natural, quiet alertness. They did not move toward Daniel. They did not signal. They simply made sure the room was safe and calm, which it already was. Daniel returned to the rail. He did not take the moment to lecture or to list his titles. He kept his voice the same as before, kind, clear, and even. "Your Honor," he said, "my visit this morning is not an inspection. I am not here to grade anyone, and I am not here to embarrass anyone. I came to listen. I believed that if I arrived like any other person, took the same paper ticket, and walked the same path, I could understand better how a morning feels for the people who come here. I want to say with respect, this room holds a lot of good work. I saw patience. I saw help offered in plain language. I saw steady hands and steady hearts." He paused and let the compliment rest in the air. The clerk's shoulders lowered a little. The bailiff nodded once, a tiny movement that said thank you. "I also saw small moments that felt big," Daniel continued. "And because they felt big to the people living them, I think they deserve our attention." He did not point at anyone. He did not name names. He spoke in pictures the room had already seen. I saw a name spoken in the wrong way, and then spoken the right way, and I watched a person's face change because her true name was heard. I saw a phone chirp for 2 seconds, and it felt like a spotlight to the person holding it. I saw a bench label that used to say one thing and now says another, with a strip of paper across the old word. I heard small jokes that were not cruel at all, but they landed hard in a room where people already feel small. The two officers at the door did not look away. Their faces were open and serious now. The public defender's hands stayed still on the rail. The volunteer's mouth pressed into a thoughtful line. Words are light until they meet a heavy morning, Daniel said. Labels are simple until they stick to a person. Tone is quiet until it turns a moment either kinder or harder. I know this is a busy place. I know you carry many stories before lunch. That is why I came. Busy rooms need gentle habits. The judge listened, head slightly tilted, eyes steady. Go on, the judge said. I would like to offer a few small ideas, Daniel said. They are not orders. They are simple steps that have helped in other public rooms. He lifted his hand, not to count, but to place each idea in the air like a small stone on a path. First, signs. A fresh sign is a fresh start. If a bench used to say one thing and now says another, it is better to replace the sign than to cover a word. A clear, kind sign helps a person relax before a single sentence is spoken. The clerk wrote a note. The volunteer made a tiny nod she did not even know she made. Second, language. A short script at the door can help the first 30 seconds feel safe. Something like, good morning. We're glad you're here. If you need help, please ask. If you're unsure where to sit, any seat behind the rail is fine until your name is called. It takes 10 seconds. It gives people ground to stand on. The officers listened carefully. One moved his thumb across his palm, as if feeling the words to learn their shape. Third, a 1-minute pause, Daniel said. I have seen this help in many places. Before the docket starts, staff take 60 seconds together. No phones, no papers to remind themselves, every person who enters this room is someone's family. They might be lost, tired, late, scared. If we can add an extra breath before we correct, we will fix more than the problem in front of us. We will help a person be brave. The judge's eyes softened. The bailiff folded his arms in a thoughtful way. Fourth, a map, Daniel said, smiling a little. I saw a wonderful flyer come in a few minutes ago. First-time visitor? Here's what to know. That is gold. If it can be placed right at the door, in a bright color, with 5 simple steps and a tiny map, it will save many mornings. The volunteer beamed now, just for a second. Fifth, names, Daniel said. If a name is hard to say, ask the person to teach you the sound, and then say it back. That 10 seconds says, I see you. It also avoids confusion later. He let his hand lower. The room felt warmer, as if the tall windows had opened a little wider. I want to say something else, Daniel added, looking toward the officers and the staff. I know how hard your jobs are. I know you see long lines and short tempers and all kinds of stress. I do not judge you. This morning, I saw kindness many times. I am simply suggesting ways to make that kindness the habit we default to, even when we are tired. The judge placed the letter on the bench and looked at Daniel with respect. Director Hayes, the judge said, using the title now because it felt right on the record, the court appreciates your visit and your words. Would you like to share how you came to be here today, in this way? Daniel's smile was small and real. Yes, Your Honor. Years ago, in this very county, I was a young man who did not understand a form. A clerk leaned forward, spoke softly, and showed me where to write. I never forgot the feeling. This morning, I wanted to be sure I understood how it feels for others now. So I came without announcement, took the same paper ticket others receive, and walked the same steps. It taught me a lot in a short time. A few faces in the room changed at that, faces that carried, for just a second, the same memory of someone helping them once when they needed it most. The judge nodded slowly. Thank you, the judge said. Daniel took a breath. With your permission, Your Honor, I can also offer a follow-up. My office has short, practical training materials about respectful communication in high-stress public settings. They are simple and useful. If the court is interested, we can share them at no cost. A half hour, a few role-play lines, and a one-page checklist can make a real difference. The clerk wrote faster now. The bailiff's look said he liked checklists. The public defender glanced at the officers, hopeful. The judge considered this and said, "We would welcome that outreach. We will work through the proper channels to schedule something." Daniel inclined his head. "Thank you, Your Honor." He paused, then added one more thought, gentle and clear. "I also want to say this, I heard short laughter this morning. It was not meant to hurt. I know that. But to someone holding a ticket they never wanted to hold, even small laughter can feel like a door closing. If we can move our laughter away from the line, and keep our helpful words close to the line, we will change the mood of the whole building." The officers did not flinch or look away. One officer's jaw tightened with regret, the other's eyes held a quiet, honest yes. It was not a moment of blame. It was a moment of growth. Daniel stepped back from the rail as if to say he had finished, but the judge raised a hand not to stop him, but to honor the moment. "Director Hayes," the judge said, "on behalf of the court, thank you for your presence and your suggestions. I would like to invite brief responses before we decide next steps. We will begin with the clerk and the bailiff, and then, if they are willing, the officers at the door." A hush gathered again, soft, respectful, expectant. The volunteer clasped her hands. The public defender leaned in, his face open. The young father on the bench sat very still, as if he did not want to disturb the air. The two plainclothes security professionals kept their quiet watch at the doorway. The clock ticked in patient beats. Daniel did not sit. He stayed where he was, ready to listen, the same way he had listened all morning. He had placed his words gently in the room, now he made space for other voices. The judge looked toward the clerk, who took a breath and lifted her chin. The officers shifted their weight, preparing to speak with care. The judge said, "We'll take them one by one," and then paused for a final second before beginning. That last second felt like the start of a better habit. The clerk spoke first. She stood with both hands on the desk, looked at the judge, then at Daniel, then at the people on the benches. Her voice was steady but gentle. She said she was grateful for the visit and the ideas. She said she tries every day to be clear and kind, but she knows there are places to improve. She wished she had said the woman's name right the first time. She said she would like a simple way to ask for the correct sound and a habit of repeating it back. She promised to make a short card for the desk that says, "Please teach me how to say your name correctly," with a blank line for writing the sound in easy letters. She also said the taped label on the bench bothered her too. It was a quick fix on a busy morning, but it did not feel right. She asked permission to replace all temporary labels with clean, new signs that use the words case participants and public seating. The judge nodded. The clerk's eyes softened with relief, and she added that she would place a small basket of first-time visitor flyers at the front and in the hallway, not just on the side table. She finished by saying she would share the new scripts with the whole team by the end of the day. The bailiff spoke next. He had the calm air of a person who keeps many lines in place with very few words. He said he liked the idea of a 1-minute pause before the docket starts. He wanted to lead it himself each morning. He pictured it as everyone standing still, taking one breath, and quietly saying the same sentence, even if only inside their heads, "Every person who enters this room is someone's family." He also said he would refresh his standard reminders. He would keep them short, clear, and friendly. He would explain the rule first, and only then ask for the change in behavior. He would make sure his hand signals were soft but sure, and he would keep the door area calm by stepping out when needed. He added that he would meet with the volunteer team so their motions matched his, because when we row in the same direction, we move faster with less effort. A small smile moved across the room at that line. The first officer at the door spoke. He cleared his throat and looked down for a second, then up. He said he was sorry for the small laughter near the line. He said he did not mean to make anyone feel small. He said the room is busy, and sometimes pressure looks like jokes. But he understood now that pressure should look like patience. He promised to shift his habits. He would greet each person with the same simple script, the one Daniel suggested: "Good morning. We're glad you're here. If you need help, please ask. If you're unsure where to sit, any seat behind the rail is fine until your name is called." He said he would also move private talk away from the line and keep his eyes on faces, not labels. He asked the judge for a chance to help with the new signs and to walk the line each hour to check for confusion. The second officer spoke. He told a short story. When he was a teenager, he once had to come to court for a traffic matter. He was scared. A guard at the door had smiled and explained where to go, and that small kindness stayed with him all day. He said he had forgotten that. He said he wanted to bring that same feeling back to the door. He would watch his tone. He would wait a full second before correcting someone. He would keep his own phone silent and out of sight to model the behavior others were asked to follow. He said he wanted to help test the flyer, the map, and the script with real people in the hallway that afternoon. The judge listened to each voice and then spoke with care. The judge said the court would adopt several steps right away. The taped labels would be replaced before the end of the week with clear, respectful signs. The phrase "case participants" would be used in all print and digital materials. The first-time visitor flyer would be placed at every entrance and at the security table, and a small map would be added, marked simply, "Check-in, seating, podium, clerk's desk." The judge also ordered a daily 1-minute pause before the docket, led by the bailiff. The judge asked the clerk to draft a name card and a name-saying script for all staff and to share it with other courtrooms as a model. Finally, the judge said the court would welcome the short training Daniel offered. The training would be scheduled within 2 weeks, during a time that does not interrupt hearings. The public defender asked to speak. The judge agreed. He said he sees how the first 60 seconds shape the next 60 minutes. He shared that calm greetings have a real effect on outcomes. People who feel respected make fewer mistakes in their answers. He offered his help in drafting the script and promised to share examples that have worked in other rooms. He also asked if the court would consider a small whiteboard by the door that shows the order of the morning in 5 steps. The judge liked this and asked him to draft the 5 steps before the day ended. The volunteer spoke from the aisle. She said the flyer was new, but she already saw how much it helped. She asked for a small rack to hold the papers, so they did not slide. She added that color matters. People spot bright colors faster than gray. She asked to print the map in a cheerful shade so nervous eyes can find it quickly. The judge approved it with a nod and said she could coordinate with the clerk's office right away. Then the judge invited brief words from the public. The young mother with the stroller said the held door in the morning made her day feel possible. She said the script at the door would help a lot. The teenager who had spoken earlier said he liked the idea of the whiteboard because words on walls feel less scary than a person calling your name when you do not know where to stand. The woman whose name had been misread thanked the clerk for trying again and said the name card idea would make her feel seen. The young father with the folder said he wanted to say thank you to the public defender and the volunteer, and he hoped the someone's family sentence would live in the room every day. Daniel listened with full attention. When the judge invited him to respond, he kept it short and kind. He thanked the court and the staff for moving from words to steps so quickly. He said he would send 2 short training outlines that afternoon, along with a 1-page checklist the bailiff could adapt. He offered contact information for a small team that can help draft scripts and test them in the hallway with volunteers. He added that he would be glad to return in a quiet way, to listen again after the changes, and to share what he observes. A hand rose at the back. It was the court administrator. She spoke with respect. She said she supported the changes and wanted to make sure they fit inside the day. She worried that the 1-minute pause, the whiteboard updates, and the extra help at the door might push the schedule. She also noted that new signs and racks would cost a little money, and budgets were tight. She did not argue. She asked for a clear plan that uses time and money in a careful way. The judge answered first. The judge said 1 minute at the start could save many minutes across the morning. Fewer lost people means fewer repeats and fewer pauses. The judge also said the whiteboard can be updated in under 30 seconds and may prevent 5 minutes of confusion. As for signs and racks, the judge believed a small cost now would prevent larger costs later. The clerk added that some signs could be printed in-house to begin, while permanent ones were ordered. The volunteer offered to get a basic rack donated by a local office store. The public defender said he could laminate the first run of maps to make them last longer. Daniel offered a small thought about time. He said the training could happen in 30 minutes before the building opens or during a lunch period on a day with a light docket. It would not need to be a long event. It could be a quick session with role-play lines and a checklist that fits in a pocket. He said the point was not perfect words. The point was a steady habit of respect. The administrator nodded and said that sounded doable. The room felt lighter. Still, there was one more thing. A messenger came to the door with a note for the clerk. The clerk read it and looked up. The note said a new group had arrived at security from the bus stop. The line was long again, and people looked tense. The officers glanced toward the hall. This was not a problem. It was a chance to practice. The judge asked if the next short recess could begin early so the door team could test the script and the signs with real people. The bailiff agreed. The volunteer grabbed a stack of flyers and a roll of tape. The public defender took a marker and a spare plastic board. The small team moved in a quiet, quick line to the hallway, their faces focused and hopeful. Daniel stayed a moment. The judge asked him one last question, kind and simple. Did he want the record corrected about his ticket? The clerk's system still showed him as a person checking in as a defendant. It was a small thing in paper, but a big thing in meaning. Daniel looked at the folded ticket. He said he would like the court to use that correction as a lesson. He asked the clerk to show the steps out loud while she fixed it, so others could learn how to correct a label with care and without shame. The judge liked this idea very much. The clerk nodded, opened the system, and began to narrate as she typed, showing the room how to change a label in a way that honors a person. As the clerk worked, a soft hum of activity floated in from the hall. The new crowd had reached the door. The officers' voices were low and warm. Good morning. We're glad you're here. If you need help, please ask. The volunteer's bright vest moved like a helpful flag. Flyers were placed at eye level. The public defender drew 5 steps on the board in big, friendly letters. The bailiff checked the line and offered a calm hand motion that looked more like a welcome than a rule. Inside the courtroom, Daniel watched the clerk finish the correction. She showed the final screen, the label updated, the note added, the old tag removed. She printed a single clean slip and handed it to Daniel with a small bow of respect. He accepted it with a thank you that was quiet but full. The judge smiled in a way that touched the whole room, like sunlight reaching the back row. They were almost ready to adjourn for the short recess when a sudden sound came from the hall. It was not loud. It was a short burst of laughter, followed by an awkward hush. The room froze for a breath, listening. The second officer leaned into the doorway, face alert but calm. He did not look worried. He looked ready. He said, "We've got it," and gave a small nod to the bailiff. The judge looked toward the hall, then back to the room. This was the last test of the day so far. Would the new habits hold when the old habits pushed back? The judge tapped the gavel once, not hard, just enough to mark the moment. The court recessed. Daniel turned toward the door, not to take the lead, but to observe how the team would meet this small, real challenge with the new words they had chosen together. The hallway settled after the short burst of laughter the way a pond settles after a small stone falls in. The circles of attention spread, then softened. The second officer stepped toward a group near the door with a calm face and a steady voice. "Good morning. We're glad you're here. If you need help, please ask," he said, just as they had practiced. The first officer moved a few feet away from the line and lowered his voice to speak with a co-worker, keeping private talk out of the path where new arrivals walked. The volunteer in the bright vest held up the flyers like a lighthouse and handed them to the people who looked lost. The public defender wrote on the small board, large and friendly, "Check in rightward arrow any seat behind the rail rightward arrow wait for your name rightward arrow come to the podium rightward arrow speak slowly." A woman who had smiled at the earlier laugh relaxed when she read the steps and saw that she had already done 2 of them right. Daniel stayed near the doorway and watched. He did not step in. He wanted the new habits to belong to the people who worked here, not to him. The bailiff floated in and out, quietly aligning chairs that had drifted and reminding anyone who forgot to silence a phone. The script at the door did more than guide feet. It guided hearts. People breathed a little deeper. The line moved without bumps. A young man with a backpack had a question about where to put his bike helmet. The first officer pointed to a safe corner and added a small tip about keeping his claim ticket in his pocket. The young man smiled like a person who had just avoided a small mistake that might have felt large. The volunteer saw 2 new faces who did not speak much English. She took a highlighter and traced the 5 steps on the flyer, circling the word seat and name with a bright loop. She walked with them to the bench and pointed gently. They nodded and sat with a visible sigh of relief. The second officer noticed a stroller wheel catching on the rubber mat and moved the mat with a quick, quiet motion that made space. It took 5 seconds and changed 10 minutes of someone else's day. When the recess ended, the judge returned, and the room lifted to its feet and then sat again. The air felt different, as if the tall windows had opened a little wider, even though they had not moved at all. The clerk spoke first. She held up a fresh sign mock-up that said "Case participants" in clear letters, with a short line beneath, "If you are unsure where to sit, any seat behind the rail is fine." The judge approved the wording on the spot. The clerk also showed the name card she had drafted for the front desk, "Please teach me how to say your name." She smiled toward the woman from earlier and said she had practiced saying that woman's name 3 times in her head during the break, and she thought she had it right now. The woman nodded, touched, and repeated the name once more so the whole room could hear it and hold it well. The bailiff stood and led the first 1-minute pause, even though it was not morning anymore. He asked everyone on staff to close their eyes if they wished and say the sentence in their own way, out loud or inside their heads, "Every person who enters this room is someone's family." The sound was no louder than a whisper. It was not dramatic. It was real. When it finished, something small and strong remained in the air, like a clean thread tying everyone to the same promise. The judge set a timeline. Signs would be ordered by Friday. Temporary signs would be printed and posted within the hour. The whiteboard would be mounted near the door by tomorrow. The first-time visitor flyers would be placed at each entrance, the security table, and the volunteers' station. The training would happen next Thursday at noon, 30 minutes, with sandwich trays brought in to save time. The court administrator agreed to the schedule and said she would track 2 numbers for the next few weeks: how many times cases were delayed due to confusion, and how much extra time was used to clear problems that began at the door. She wanted to see if the small steps paid back the day. Everyone liked that plan. The officers asked to try the script one more time with the late afternoon crowd. The judge consented. The bailiff offered a simple hand signal if anyone started to drift into side jokes near the line, 1 finger over the heart and a small nod toward the door, a reminder to keep the space kind. The public defender promised to refresh the board each morning with the date and the 5 steps so people knew it was current and not an old list. The volunteer drew a tiny map on the flyer that showed, like a children's book, the door, the benches, the rail, the podium, and a happy face near the clerk's desk. She added in small letters, "If you are scared, that is okay. We will help you." When the docket ended, the judge called the day a success in progress. No one clapped. That was not the culture of the room. But eyes were brighter, and shoulders were lower, and even the clock seemed to tick with a friendlier sound. Daniel thanked the court and said he would send the training materials by late afternoon. He did not ask for a ceremony or a photo. He did not offer a speech for the news. He shook hands with the judge, the clerk, the bailiff, the officers, the public defender, the volunteer, and the administrator. He thanked each person by name. He left the building the same way he had entered it, steady and quiet, taking the stairs one at a time. That evening, the training outline arrived by email, a half-hour plan with 4 small scenes staff could act out to practice tone, names, scripts at the door, and how to correct a label without causing shame. There was a checklist too, simple and neat. The bailiff printed it on cardstock and trimmed it and kept a stack in a drawer so each person could carry one in a pocket. The next Thursday, the training took place in the jury room. People ate simple sandwiches and laughed at the funny parts of the role plays and learned from the earnest parts. The officers took turns practicing the script. The clerk practiced the name card with a co-worker who pretended to have a long name with unfamiliar sounds. The volunteer demonstrated the flyer and the tiny map and how to point without making a person feel like a problem. They ended on time. They kept the checklists. Over the next weeks, small changes added up. The administrator's numbers showed fewer delays. The whiteboard by the door turned into a friendly habit. The signs were replaced with clean, permanent ones that used the right words and a gentle font. The first-time visitor flyers got a new version with a larger map because one child had taken the old flyer home and colored the shapes, and her parent wrote a note saying the map helped them tell the story of the day to a grandmother who was worried. The court printed more maps in that style. People began to arrive with less fear. Some still came in with heavy hearts, that is life, but the building did not add extra weight. It helped carry some. The officers held each other to the script without being stiff. If one forgot, the other started it, and both smiled. The first officer kept a water bottle next to a spare box of tissues, and both got used. The second officer moved the rubber mat near the stroller spot without being told, every single morning. Private jokes still existed, humans are humans. But they lived farther from the line and never landed on a person's morning. The bailiff's 1-minute pause became a quiet anchor. On days when the docket looked long, the pause felt like a warm coat. On days when the docket was light, the pause still mattered, because habits matter most when they are not tested. One afternoon, Daniel returned without announcement and sat in the back again. The new signs were up. The board at the door had the 5 steps written in neat letters. The clerk used the name card without making a show. The public defender whispered a plan to a man with paint on his sleeves, and the man spoke slowly when his turn came. A phone chirped, and the bailiff gave the calm reminder, and the owner smiled and turned it off without shrinking. The officers treated a late bus story not as a long excuse but as a simple problem to solve. The volunteer passed a flyer to a person whose hands shook and said, "You are not alone," and the person nodded and took 2 breaths. The first officer noticed Daniel on his way out. He did not call for attention. He stopped by and said, "Thank you for the push. We are trying to make it a habit we don't have to think about." Daniel said thank you back and added, "You are doing it. I can feel it when I walk in the door." The second officer joined and said he had put the sentence "someone's family" on a small card inside his wallet. He said he looked at it each time he polished his badge. Daniel smiled and said habits are built the same way you polish anything, little circles, every day, until the surface reflects the best of what you want to see. The judge paused the docket for 10 seconds and said, for the record, that the court was seeing fewer repeats, clearer answers, and steadier mornings. He thanked the staff and the public for building the room together. He did not mention titles. He mentioned people, the volunteer, the officers, the clerk, the bailiff, the public defender, the administrator, and everyone who had walked through the door and shown patience while the room learned to be kinder. Before leaving, Daniel walked down the hall and stopped by a small plaque that listed the names of clerks who had served the court for many years. He saw the name of the clerk from long ago who had helped him as a young man. He pulled out his notebook and wrote a short letter to her office, even if she had retired, and said thank you. He told the story of how one quiet voice once changed his whole day, and how that one voice had echoed, years later, into a better habit for many people. He sealed the letter and handed it to the current clerk with a smile. Outside, the day had the kind of light that makes ordinary things look clear and true. A bus sighed at the curb. A cyclist rang a bell. Two birds lifted from a branch in a simple, perfect arc. Daniel looked back at the courthouse one last time. It looked the same as any other day to a stranger. But he knew it was different inside. He knew people now met a kind script at the door. He knew a name would be asked and learned. He knew a laugh would be saved for a place where it could not bruise a morning. He knew a 1-minute pause could hold a whole room steady. He walked away without hurry. He did not need to be seen. The work belonged to the people who lived it. The lesson, in the end, was as simple as the words on the whiteboard by the door: start with welcome, speak with care, slow down enough to hear the whole story. When a room remembers that every person is someone's family, rules still hold, schedules still move, and justice still works, but dignity walks beside them, step for step, and that makes all the difference.